Good morning, everyone. So good to see you. I just got the message that the 8:30 service let out, so they'll be down here pretty soon. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Forum Fall Season. Last night, San Francisco contemporary music players performed the Bay Area premiere of Raven Chacon's Pulitzer Prize-winning composition, Voiceless Mass. Raven is a composer, performer, and installation artist from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. His mesmerizing original work for organ and ensemble, Voiceless Mass, considers the spaces in which we gather, the history of access to these spaces, and the land upon which these buildings sit. In exploiting the architecture of the cathedral, the work considers the futility of giving voice to the voiceless when ceding space is never an option for those in power. Today, we're going to be talking about Raven's career as an artist and mentor, how his heritage influences his work, and the important themes of his work, Voiceless Mass. Raven, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Reverend Malcolm. Yeah.
It's such a gift to have you, and I was so moved by your music last night. I just, even as I was falling asleep, I had it like so deep in me. It was present. It's a kind of a crazy question. I don't think I've ever asked anybody this, but what are some of your favorite sounds? And how does your experience of sound change over time? I remember when I was a boy, I loved the sound of the bassoon and the sound of the oboe. And the older I get, the more I start loving the sound of the clarinet. I loved French horn when I was a kid, and now I love like slacky guitar kind of sounds.
Oh yeah. I think wind. Wind is my favorite sound.
Yeah.
Natural wind, but. I think of when you're driving down the freeway or driving around, at least for me in the desert, and the window's cracked about, that much, and wind is coming into that vehicle, and, you can almost hear how fast you're going and gauge that by the wind, and that sound. So I record that all the time. I just, it used to be a cassette Walkman. I would record that, but now we have phones, right? So sometimes I'll hear the right kind of wind and capture that.
Yeah, it's like when you get wind above about 10 knots per mile, 10 knots per hour in like the Presidio. That's when the eucalyptus trees start to like sing. And when you get it really fast, the Golden Gate Bridge for a while was just like humming, because the way they built this new guardrail. So, and then I love the sound of the foghorns too.
Yeah. But it was years later too that I was studying music. I was learning the piano, and I should say the piano is one of my least favorite sounds, but. It gave me the tools to understand, all the notes and how they were laid out in a big grid. But I agree, the clarinet, the bass clarinet, I end up using that instrument in almost everything I do when I can.
When I first walked in during rehearsal, that was the first sound I heard, and I was like, oh, I'm right at home. There's something so warm about it. I'd love it if you could talk about the music that you really care about and kind of the history of the music that you care about. Just, I remember when I was a student, and they would have a library of CDs that you could check out. And it exposed me to music I never would have heard. And it just revolutionized how I hear music. But I wonder if you can talk about what you liked when you were young and how that's evolved and changed.
Yeah, when I was young, there wasn't a whole lot of access to music when I was young. I grew up on the Navajo reservation in a town called Chinle. I grew up around my grandparents. My grandfather would sing all the time in Navajo language. He would sing these songs just, driving down the road, working in the yard, sitting on the couch watching a basketball game. He'd be singing. And to this day, I don't know if some of those songs were very old songs, of Diné people, or they were songs he made up on the spot. He was just singing constantly, and I feel like he was just improvising some of these songs and making them up in real time. That was one part of, in retrospect, thinking about a lot of music that I took in, but also all my uncles and aunts and my parents, I mean, listened to rock music, and so there was a lot of rock music in the house, and heavy metal and this kind of thing. And so that was, that was at least an entry into seeing people trying to play instruments as fast as possible, I think. And so, I get asked a lot if I listened to classical music when I was young, and I said, I didn't really have access to that. I wanted to, but I think, having any kind of idea about somebody playing their instrument virtuosically, I think that was what I point to as at least understanding that one had to, had a practice, had a mode of working and a style they were working on, and how they would develop that.
Yeah, and it's hard to describe too, but I mean, just pre-internet days, there was a way in which we just didn't have as much exposure to as wide different kinds of things. I mean, it's such a profound change. I mean, in terms of what's available to us.
Yeah. I mean, it's the internet, I suppose, can be a good thing in this sense that we have access to all of this music that was very inaccessible in the past, and being able to hear a musician from halfway around the world, a musician who likewise might never have had the opportunity to upload the work that they're making. And so we think of the most kind of rural places on this planet, and the opportunity to connect with those folks one-to-one is amazing.
Yeah, in Maui, the internet just totally changed surfing, because surfers could see what other people are doing in other places. And in Maui, there wasn't anything to do but surf all the time. So you could watch the videos and you could just really advance it. And then people could see you. I mean, so no one would know if you were a great surfer on the island of Maui in 1970, because no one really, there weren't that much people going back and forth between the islands.
Yeah.
But it does change the exposure, and it changes how you learn your style and what you have available to imitate or copy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I suppose the downside to this is people just keep trying to outdo each other, right?
Yeah.
And that guitarist I was saying is playing as fast as possible. Somebody will be playing faster than them. Probably some 10-year-old in Japan or something. It's gonna be,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's good for the evolution of art, I think. At least that's, in the areas where I'm working, to consider the way to use these technologies as something that could be beneficial to the work that we're doing. I think connecting with those other people who are doing this, seeing that other work, and then sharing the ideas behind this work is something that's I hope is worth the other risks of embracing this kind of technology.
Yeah. How do you compose a piece of music? Like, how do you start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's all different. I have a whole, I was going to say shoebox, but it's a bigger, cardboard box of receipts and napkins and scrap pieces of paper that I've written. Whenever I have an idea, I write it down on that, napkin, and just hopefully don't run it through the washing machine and then throw it in this box. And so sometimes I go into the box and make something. Up until a few years ago, I used to compose for fun, for the fun of it. I would have an idea of something, and I would have the time and the motivation to make something. Now there's been more invitations for commissions, so I'm very specific about what I might be writing. Somebody asked me last night why I chose the instruments for the piece last night, Voiceless Mass. And the reason was very practical. That was the instrumentation of the ensemble that was commissioning me. And so, in the beginning of making a piece of work, it's not that I have that much of a clear idea of saying, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. I'm open to seeing what's available and working with that. And then maybe if I need, an extra clarinet, which is what happened, I might request that. But if there's too many possibilities or too many choices, I get a little intimidated by that. And so, But yeah, I will say the piano doesn't end up in any of this work at all.
Yeah, it's funny. What do you not like about the sound of the piano? It's just, I'll tell you a crazy thing. So about clarinets. So there is a change when you change register. There are notes on the clarinet that I like way more than other notes on the clarinet. And I don't even know if it's just the physics of how the sound is made or what. But there's like a quality above middle C, so high C. One octave above middle C, like that's a range I really love. Below middle C, that's a range I just don't like. So is there something like that about the piano, or is it just like you have bad associations from having piano lessons?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to reconsider the clarinet. There's like a lot of good knowledge there. No, I play the piano all the time. I mean, the piano is one of the tools I use to make music. If I'm trying to figure something, I have a piano on my phone. There's apps that are a little piano, and you can. But there's some problems I have with it, I suppose, and one of it is the sonority of it. Anybody who saw the piece last night, there's a lot of tones that are held for
exactly
a very long time. In the piano, you can't really do that. You hit it, and then you could do the pedal thing, but it dissipates, right? It falls apart. It goes away. And if you have a good woodwind player that can circular breathe, you can get that going for a long time. But the other reason is that it's locked into this equal temperament system.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
And you can't play between the two keys.
Yeah.
You can't
bend any notes.
You can't bend any notes. I'm always searching for those notes in between the two notes. And
I loved that about last night, by the way. Like you'd get to there'd be two notes that would be so close to each other, and it felt like the whole cathedral was kind of like vibrating. And you're right, you can't do it with a piano.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the main reasons. And but as a tool, it's very important, and it's a beautiful instrument in that sense. I just don't end up using it too much. And so, having said that, this piece last night was the first time I'd written for organ.
Yeah.
And so, and it was a way to kind of explore those relationships of the other things that the organ can do, all of the pipes, all of the ways of changing the sonority of the instrument, which I find fascinating. And,
well, even as you start talking, I don't know if people adjust the pipes. You could. Because the wind blowing through the pipe, you could change how the wind flowed through the pipes in a way that would bend the notes.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I believe people do that.
Yeah.
I think there's ways of
tinkering with the organ, which I never thought of before this moment.
Mm-hmm.
What about rhythm? Like rhythms, how do you come up with those for music?
Yeah, well, maybe a better way to talk about this is that the different priorities of how I approach writing a piece is pitch and melody is at the very bottom. That's that's my last concern. I think one step above that is rhythm. Rhythm is important. Melody is important. They're all important, but they're the last considerations for me. What's of higher importance is the sounds, the timbres, of the instrument, the grouping of instruments together is something I'm more concerned about, and then the harmony of those. Even though I was saying maybe the individual pitch of the instruments is not a high priority, I think the relationships between the pitches of the instruments is definitely something that I'm thinking about before thinking about what key something is in or what starting pitch instrument might be starting on. So where rhythm falls into that, I think is very much after the fact. I think I'm thinking about how those relationships are intersecting within the piece, how the organ and the bass clarinet are blending. How much space do they have? When should they not play? Where is the silence in all of this? And I think ultimately that determines some kind of rhythm in the piece, or at least a rhythmic idea. And so it begins there. And I think another kind of a group of instruments that struggle with, but they might be up there with bass clarinet, and clarinet is percussion.
Yeah.
I mean, when we think of percussion, I think a lot of music schools, when they speak about percussion, they only talk about hitting things. And there's all these other ways of playing percussion. There's rubbing instruments together.
Right.
There's
the bow
friction.
On
there's the
metal,
bow.
yeah.
There's last night in the piece. There's they take a crotale off and they spin it on a drum head, and it just kind of spins around and comes to rest, and that makes a sound. And so thinking of all the kind of delicate things one can do with percussion. It's not always just hitting a snare drum. Even though drummers, that's why they get into it, so they can beat on things. But I think inside of those delicate sounds that one can make with percussion, I think there's inside of those are rhythms, and maybe one reason that rhythm is not so much of a priority for me is a lot of my scores. I mean, this one last night, Voiceless Mass, it's written out. I mean, everything is specified. All the rhythms are there. All the pitches are there, and there's not a lot of agency within the piece necessarily, except at a few key moments. But I think one of the things I'm questioning with chamber music, with the style of classical music and notation is the instruction, is the rigidity of making a triplet and saying this must be played exactly like this, when we all have fluctuations of how we interpret rhythm. And so I'm interested in those fluctuations, those differences, that you might play a triplet slightly different than I play a triplet, or a dotted quarter and an eighth note.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a very rigid system.
Yeah. So I try to see what I can do to deviate from those rigid instructions.
The manuscripts of your musical notations, they're so beautiful, and there is something that I see in them of like the art of the Southwest. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just how you started doing your own musical notations, and then how they began to have their own life of their own in the visual art world.
Yeah, I started making my own notations for only one reason, and it was not to be avant-garde or to necessarily to I don't know, make something weird. Or they really were to solve a problem that I was thinking that regular standard notation wasn't able to provide as a prompt. And so maybe an example would be, what direction do you aim your instrument in? If you're a trombonist, can you move around? How do you bow your violin? I mean, there's all these shapes you can do that would affect the sound. You could make a figure eight. You could make a spiral. You could play these instruments very much in a loop or in a circle. And how do you relay the complexity of that agency? Instead of just having, let's say, repeat symbols. What if you wanted a more complex looping and you wanted to leave that up to the player and not dictate it so strictly? That's why I started making these symbols. And there's two bits of influence, I think. One major influence, and one of those influences is on the west side of Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's a place called the Petroglyph Park. It's now protected, but in the 90s they were going to make a freeway over these rocks that have these etchings that are thousands of years old. And I would go over there and just sketch these. I would take a lot of influence from them. I would draw my own versions of them as well. And growing up in the Southwest also, which has a lot of authentic art. You can't get more authentic than these drawings and petroglyphs inside of these etched on these volcanic rocks. but I think just as much, one is bombarded with the tourist market of Native American art. So I like that. I like looking at those things because they're weird. Going in Santa Fe and seeing something that is not authentic. Maybe it was made halfway around the world. I know a lot of people might have problems with that, but I would also just draw those because I thought they were strange, and I would combine them together. And now I'm wondering if that then makes them authentic because I'm, a member of a enrolled tribe.
Yeah.
maybe I'm skirting around the Indian Arts and Crafts Act or something. But anyway, I mean, it was more than just sketching them. Then I was finding that there was some musicality in these drawings that I was making, and I've been developing them since. And some of them look like other symbols. I mean, we use the cross, the plus symbol in music notation. That might mean a left-handed pizzicato or a mute on a trumpet. And but this is a symbol that gets used all around the world and has been used for a lot of different reasons. And so I think there's a lot of meaning inside of a balanced cross. I mean, this could be a rhythm. This could be a meter. This could imply 4/4
or
meter.
coda 4/4.
Exactly. It could be a coda. Yeah, it could be any of these things. It could. So I then became interested in the ambiguity of these symbols, what they might mean to different people, what they might mean to a classical musician, what they might mean to somebody who studies, languages or runes of other languages, other kinds of notations, cartography. Any of these symbols might have other kinds of meaning. And I think when they're put back into a score, especially a score that is dealing with site specificity, with landscapes, with history, there's this embedded significance that can happen and be read in the work.
Yeah, I had this aunt and uncle who discovered these Native American artwork in like a drawer in like something like this from the 19th century, and it kind of reminds me of that. Like even but it's beautiful. I kept thinking about that, your musical notation, as the conductor last night was, those John Cagean gestures, of showing the whole time that the organ's going to play, and that conveys so much more information to me than just like measure after measure, bar after bar, and you have to count like 42, 43, 40. It's so much easier to have somebody just give you like a clock almost. But I appreciated that because I know the organist so well, and I was grateful on his behalf.
Yeah, that you're referring to it's called the Cage clock, and it's named after John Cage, and it's a method of conducting and turning the conductor turning their hands into the hands of a clock. And so what Eric was doing last night was very much just marking time like this, and the percussionist might hit a bell at 15 seconds, and so that would happen here and keep going. And so those are those moments I was talking about where it escapes that rigidity. It allows the music to flow in a different way. It breaks out of the system of what you'd been hearing. If you'd been hearing a pulse and a meter, those are the opportunities for the music to stretch itself.
Yeah, and I just think of it from the artist's perspective, like as the organist, for instance, instead of like 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 for like 5 minutes. Instead, you can like relax, and you can step out of that rigidity into something new.
Yeah, it allows. What I've been finding too is it allows each performer to not necessarily follow the conductor either. They're also listening where their relationship amongst the ensemble, and hearing themselves blend with different people, different members of the group, and focusing on other parameters, dynamics, how loud they're swelling into this group kind of choir, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. It was the first time I've ever really realized all that. I learned a lot listening. So when I read articles about you, that they provide me kind of like a dossier so I can kind of know more about you. But there's a lot of references to the noise scene, and I wonder if you can just talk about just that community of people who are working in art these days, where they began, where they come from, and just your continuing involvement in it.
Yeah. The chamber music part of my practice is for a long time. I mean, like I said, since I was a teenager, was a large part of the work I'd been making, exploring all of these instruments of the Western canon, experimenting with notation, and just composing for these acoustic instruments and the spaces that they get presented in. A whole nother side practice of mine that is still in a very much way separate from this chamber music that I make was experimenting with building my own instruments. And so I was doing a lot with cassette recorders and cassette tape at a really young age. One thing you were talking about influences. I was really into the Beatles, and I was making copies of the albums on cassette tape from other cassette tapes that somebody had. I would borrow whatever, Sgt. Pepper's, and then dub it onto a tape, and listen to all those albums endlessly. And then I wanted more, so I took I unscrewed the cassette and took the tape out and put it in backwards and screwed it back together. And then I had like 12 more Beatles albums to listen to. But they were all in reverse. So I was, that might have been what happened. That's why I started doing this thing. I don't know. I just wanted more music, and I didn't have access. And so that's, but yeah, maybe it got me interested in this kind of atonality, or this kind of stretched music, maybe, everything sounding in reverse. But then I started doing other things. Yeah, I started finding a way to re-record music and use the pause button like an instrument and chop it up. And I tried to build some guitars. I tried to build some microphones, and none of it sounded good. I mean, by standards of fidelity, it was just noisy and maybe even ugly. And because there's no proper way to play these, then anybody can play this bass guitar that's made out of a bed spring or whatever. There's no virtuosity, because there's no history of that.
Right.
And
You're the first one. You're the best bed spring bass player in the world.
Yeah, or my little sister is, or the neighbor or whoever. So that so then I'd get people together and we'd play with this stuff out in the desert, and just for fun. I didn't know that there was a thing called improvisation, or free jazz or anything like that. I didn't know that the full spectrum. I didn't know you could have a career doing this until I went later to Cal Arts and saw, people are doing this for a living, and teaching other people to do it. But yeah, I was making this kind of noise, and then more and more becoming familiar that this was a genre of experimental music that was separate from the John Cage kind of work. I mean, I was familiar with John Cage. I just didn't know there was this whole other scene of people making music with their instruments and making noise with it. So yeah, and eventually I moved away from New Mexico. I didn't encounter people making that kind of music until I moved to California. I went to Cal Arts, and then there's people who do this, and I'd found that community of other folks who make that kind of music. Some of them were only playing concerts for like the door guy and the sound person, but then maybe next time there'd be 2 more people in the audience. And after 20 years, yeah, I mean, here I am doing this still. But yeah, I think there's a worldwide community of people who are involved in that genre, and that genre comes from experimentation. I think there's a big kind of dilemma we always hear about in music schools about, what do we call this new music? Is it experimental music? Is it avant-garde? And I think something like noise music is very much trusts the idea of experimenting, that you might make something and that it could fail, and that would be okay, and that would be a sound that was unique.
Yeah.
The failure, I think it embraces that idea that it doesn't have to be the best fidelity, it doesn't have to be virtuosic, and and the instrument could break after one show. And I think that's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. As you're talking, I used to spent a few summers with my aunt and uncle in Arizona in the high country during the summers. And basically all we did was just like run around and catch lizards and things like that. But the space had an influence on me and on my sense of spirituality, on my sense of self. I wonder how the Southwest has affected you as an artist.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough, I'm fortunate to be from a tribe that was not displaced from the place that we consider our homelands. And when we were, by Kit Carson in the late 1800s, we were able to come back eventually. And so I think, I'm very happy and grateful that we are still in a place that we consider our home. And I think that alone has its own significance in the way I think about the work that I make, about telling the story of those places, about always being in that region to just exist and to make work there, and to find others who live there now to make work with. And so I have faith in the sound that might emerge from this place, the artwork that might emerge from this place, and hope to be in kinship with the relatives and others who still steward the land of that area. Other kinds of influence, though, other than the wind going through the car window, the millimeter car gap, is it's just that kind of maybe open space, or that kind of ability to escape time, to not be in a city environment. And this is something I notice the more I travel and then come back, as being in a place that is very noisy, a city's landscape. I teach in New York City, and I recently moved to the East Coast. And so just hearing the differences in those landscapes, and that density of people, of cars, of airplanes, and then hearing a person or a car or an airplane in a place where there's nobody around, and weighing the two things. An airplane going across the sky in New York City sounds very different than the airplane going across over the Grand Canyon, And so I think I'm always thinking about what those might be, or what that might sound like, or what the layers of that sound is.
Who are your important teachers when it comes to music and art?
I think everybody and I don't want this to sound like a cop-out, but everybody I've ever played music with is surely a teacher to me, whether they're much better than me, or they're somebody who I am their teacher, and I'm playing music with them. I think that's how one learns, is playing music with somebody who's a master at what they do, but also playing with people who are learning and who are looking to you to provide that kind of guidance. I think I wrote a string quartet years ago, so I teach young people on the Navajo and Hopi reservations to write string quartets. And every time I'm trying to demonstrate something on the violin or the cello, I don't really play violin or cello, but I have one. And I try to play it for the kids, at least to demonstrate a pizzicato, for instance. But every time they are then writing a technique, or combining multiple techniques that I've shown them, do I hear something I've never heard before? And oftentimes, I mean, I didn't buy these violins or cellos for too much money, so I let the student play them as well. And I most definitely hear them come up with a sound that a person who's been playing violin for 40 years could never achieve. And again, maybe it's that faith in the noise music, in the non-technique, the embracing that something is not going to sound the same every time either. And so I try to really, transcribe what'd you do there? What was that accident you made? So I think, and so playing with, I tell students too, play music with as many people as you can, when you're starting out, and you'll learn a lot of different kinds of styles. But I had a piano teacher, her name was Dawn Chambers. She's the one who taught me to play piano. I studied with some composers, James Tenney, Wadada Leo Smith, composer Michael Pizarro, another composer, Christopher Schultes, was at the University of New Mexico. So I learned a lot from them as well, and just others. I mean, William Wynant, who played percussion last night, he's somebody who, one of the first kinds of experimental music that I heard was
so
one
he
of
was
his
playing
recordings.
those big.
He was doing the bells last night and the
yeah.
timpani. Yeah,
I thought that's.
And
I was moved by that.
Yeah, I mean, he's a brilliant musician. Last night was his last concert with the contemporary music players, and so it was really nice to have him play on my piece. He's played in other works of mine before, and I met him 20 years ago. He came down to Cal Arts and gave us a workshop and lesson as well.
Wow. What coaching did you give the musicians last night to just help them to be their best and bring the music into being?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about having a conductor is they have to do all of that kind of work,
Yeah, that's right. I guess, and then afterwards you can say, oh, here's like how I would adjust it,
Yeah. I mean, there's the role of the conductor is to guide all of them. Eric is a brilliant musician, so he has the right ways of articulating what is needed in this. And so that was another instance where I learned a lot of just saying, oh, this could sound this way. This needs to be stretched out. This part needs to be faster. This needs to be this note needs to be held longer. And I'll take that to the next time we play this piece and give that input. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's always an opportunity to be encouraging to the entire ensemble and saying, you all are making this happen. You all are playing your version of that. And I think that's something to always consider. I know not every composer is like that, but I love that every time this will get played, it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be its own version. And I'm even interested, I don't know if this is the case every time, but if there's, you can hear the sound of the city.
Yeah, you can. I mean, and that was one of my disappointments, is that the cable car sound is one of my favorite sounds. Of the cable car going whoosh and ding, 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 ding. Yeah. I would have loved to have that in your concert.
Well, I have other pieces.
You can just see the guy out on the street. You got to, bring the cable car.
Yeah, I mean, I have this other piece, and it gets played in a lot of different cities, and we did it in Houston, Texas, this piece called American Ledger. And it sounded like Texas musicians playing this piece, and take it over to California, it sounds like California. I don't know how to describe it, I'm not going to get too stereotypical about regional sound, but there was a bit of a kind of like Texas Roadhouse style going on in this chamber composition that I thought was really cool. Yeah,
that is so cool. Yeah, that music is in us. So tell us a little bit about Voiceless Mass, how it came into being, and just like how it sounds different in different places. I mean, one of the things my son kept asking is, are there places where you can't play your music, and are there places where your music especially belongs? That's a lot of questions. That's like 6 questions right there. But how did Voiceless Mass come into being?
Yeah, Voiceless Mass came at an invitation from a new music organization called Present Music in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And this was during pandemic. This was in 2021. They wanted me to write a new piece for them, and I always have some initial questions of saying, well, when is the deadline? When will this be taking place? And what is the venue? Who are the players? And they said, we have this annual Thanksgiving Day concert, and we'd like to present it there. And I didn't find that problematic. I spoke about this a little bit last night, that that's definitely an anniversary of something that should be addressed, and I welcome the opportunity to speak about that. At the same time, that holiday or that occasion marks an event that happened on the East Coast of the United States with tribes on that side of the country. Of course, in the Southwest, we had different encounters with European contact. So we have our own kind of Thanksgivings. But yeah, I understand that that's a anniversary to be addressed, and if music can be a part of that, then I wanted to accept that invitation. And I like Thanksgiving too. I like to eat. I like to hang out with family. I find the positive parts of that date. And then they said the Thanksgiving Day concerts happen in the St. John's the Evangelist Church in Milwaukee. I said, okay, wow. So, this is a very heavy space to be doing a concert in as well. Always thinking about, of course, the beautiful acoustics that are in many churches. And they said, there's also a church organ in the cathedral, and we can use this as part of your composition. And I said, okay, this can be, this is definitely something I wanted to do. It was definitely thinking about the instrument being a part of the cathedral. What can I say with all of this? And so it started with a lot of research about the organ. And I'm sorry to bring up the piano so much in this talk today, but the piano was there in a way to replace, or maybe I should say substitute, individuals of the orchestra. It was a solution to bringing all of those notes into a piano version, and it could be there, and one wouldn't have to hire all those, the whole chamber orchestra. And so, thinking that they could also, the keyboard instruments could also perhaps replace singers as well. And I've been also thinking about a lot of relationships of instruments and institutions that they're tied to. At the same time, I was working on a piece for snare drum and thinking about the snare drum's role in the U.S. military and the U.S. cavalry as being an instrument of that kind of encroachment.
Exactly. It's like the way the Christians heard organ music when that was the music they played in the Roman amphitheaters when they were being fed to the lions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, musical instruments have they have cultural associations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to put all of this into a composition. I wanted to think if the organ is tied to the church, then what does this mean as far as replacing the voice? Does this mean that that there's been a suppression of voice? And so I was thinking about some other actions that were happening in the Southwest around removing conquistador statues in New Mexico. Wow, I should have recorded that.
I know, that was great. I don't know what it was.
There was a conquistador named Oñate that had cut off the left foot of every man from Acoma Pueblo. And there's statues around New Mexico honoring this man. And of course, around pandemic, there was a lot of protests around Confederate monuments in the South. And so, I was thinking about the Catholic Church's relationship with indigenous people in the Southwest and how that led to a loss of language, a loss of culture. And so I wanted to, again, consider that in this music composition that I was making and speak about that to the best of my ability through instrumental music. So instrumental music has can be a very inadequate way of expressing these concerns or telling these histories, telling these stories. The best we might have is a title and program notes, But it was thinking about all of this. It was thinking about the residential schools in Canada, and it was ultimately, though, if it was going to at least be an opportunity to bring attention to this history that sometimes gets very much hidden and obscured from public view, then maybe at least through its discussion, music could be this opportunity to have that talk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of our traditions at Grace Cathedral for the forum is we take questions. Rebecca Nessel is gathering questions. One of the things that I would love you to talk about a little bit is the Sweetland project, just how that came into being and just what you're hoping to accomplish with that.
Yeah, that was an opera, and in a lot of ways it's related to Voiceless Mass. I think even in not only in it addressing some of the history of North America and of colonization, but even sonically it's in the world of this more kind of consonant chamber music, I should say, that comes from traditions of different kinds of classical forms. Sweetland is actually two operas. Let me see how I can describe this. It's not a factual retelling of the history of colonization in North America. Rather, it's a bit of an alternate universe story describing different encounters that have happened and maybe turning that into another kind of proposition. So as you watch Sweetland, it's very complicated to talk about this because it's two separate operas, and one is it feels, when you watch Sweetland, it feels like you're watching some kind of nightmare or telling the story of a nightmare you had last night. One of the stories is a conflating of Thanksgiving, but also a forced marriage, and you see one act that is telling this story much in the way that we might have learned about Thanksgiving or the union of Pocahontas or Malinche or Sacagawea's role in Manifest Destiny. But then after an intermission, you watch it again, and you hear more, you see more of the kind of real story of maybe what they didn't tell you in textbooks. On the other opera, it's that story of Lewis and Clark, of Manifest Destiny, of the country becoming the United States from east to west. And when you watch it again, it becomes a bit more contemporary, talking about overdevelopment, gentrification, acceleration of commerce in the United States. And there's points when, depending what ticket you got, you were in one or the other opera, but there's times where they intersect. And so everybody comes together in the beginning, at intermission, and for the finale.
One of the questions my son mentioned was, how are things different for young people in the town that you grew up in now than it was for you when you were growing up back then?
Yeah, it's hard for me to gauge. I'm there as much as I can be. What brings me back to the town that I grew up in is relatives. My grandparents lived there up until recently. They're no longer with us. But I also teach in the school there, so I go back in the summers and teach the string quartet program. I feel like it's hard for me to gauge, but I feel like not much has changed. Like it's very much the same as when I was growing up there, with the only difference being what we were speaking about earlier, the access to the outside world because of the internet, which can be a positive or negative thing, of course. But I feel like it's very much the same. I think the schools, the public schools and the schools on the reservation, they don't prioritize the arts at all. That's one of the reasons I come and do this project. And but that's something that not just isolated to the reservations in the country. I mean, this is a condition of public schools all over the country, is a lack of prioritization of the arts. And of course, if one wants to go and get an instrument or have access to actual computers or other things that are necessary for some artists to make work, that is definitely a barrier. I mean, one would have to go drive 4 hours to Phoenix or Albuquerque and go to a music store. Yeah, I mean, there's always hope. I think again, I feel fortunate that my community is one that has a strong language retention. I know some tribes have very much endangered languages, and so I think from my experience, the schools do a great job in at least trying to retain that, for the young people. But yeah, in a lot of ways, I should mention that for me to speak about a place not changing can also be a good thing. I mean, to stand still and to retain a way of life can be also something that's a good thing. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about it for Native Hawaiians. I mean, the difference between now and when we were children is that now there are way more Native Hawaiian speakers. So Hawaiian immersion schools is the biggest change. And so, yeah, it's almost like I said, they're more savvy than the generation that is my age, because they grew up in Hawaiian immersion programs when those just didn't exist when we were children. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that language is huge, and retaining language is huge. Can you please talk about the difference between Earth performance of Voiceless Mass? Can you please talk about the difference between each performance of Voiceless Mass for you? Has any group played it better than the others?
I don't know if that
It's like my favorite child is.
I will say last night was very special. Because of the acoustics of Grace Cathedral. I had not had quite that experience before. So I've been present for about maybe 10, 11, 12 of these performances so far. And I will say that last night was very special because of the space. The space was doing something that I can't explain, of blending all of the instruments together, despite them being separated in the hall, and doing so in a way where it didn't muddy the sound.
Yeah.
It didn't become a blur of reverb. There was still a lot of articulation, and it almost amplified everybody much more than I was expecting, for sure. So that was, I will say, last night was one of my favorites. But they've all been very different. They've all been, they've all been they've all been done in churches for the most part. And I think what I'm appreciative of is the conversations that I'm able to have with the piece, people's interest in why the piece exists, and also just sharing it. I think I'm still blown away that I've had a composition played more than once or twice. And that's been a new kind of thing since it won the Pulitzer, is people having, more attention about the music that I make. But this one is definitely the most I've ever had played. I have compositions that have never been played before, and so yeah.
So the Pulitzer Prize, and then being a MacArthur Genius. Patrick Makuakane is a recent MacArthur Genius Grant recipient. He wanted to be here today, but he's out of town. So he works within kind of Native Hawaiian traditions, but he really kind of pushes the boundaries. So there are definitely elders back home in Hawaii who look at him as going maybe a little bit too far. But I wonder, just like how the Pulitzer and the MacArthur, kind of, are they going to enable you to open up your doors into new areas, or are they going to help you to double down on doing what it is that you already do? Like, how is it going to change your art?
Yeah, I'm going to double down for sure. I'll have more time to double down. It's going to allow me to, well, for about 20 years, I've been self-funding a lot of projects. One of them is a record label that I run. Again, cassettes. I put out people's music on cassettes of some kid making noise up in rural New Mexico. And I used to just fund that perpetually with the previous release. I would, that one would sell out, I'd get some money, put out another one. And now I can fund a lot more of these things. Yeah. And, I suppose I could write a grant or something for this, but it feels like it's not in the spirit of that. I kind of want to keep it DIY, and encourage that kind of aesthetic, I think. But I think overall it's to slow down. I know my wife would like me to not travel so much, but it also would allow me to work on some bigger projects. I've never written a piece for orchestra, for instance, and recently I've gotten an invitation to do so. So I can't really do that on the airplane or and even in the hotel room. I need a big desk for that one and a bunch of papers.
Yeah, right. And stacks of papers.
Yeah, so I need to be home for that one. So yeah, very practical things will change like that. But yeah, I'm just really honored that that was awarded to me, and with the Pulitzer too, just having the recognition for that piece.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary accomplishment. I'm very glad that they're recognizing your art because it really is extraordinary. We have more questions. When you are composing, do you visualize something in shaping the music? Is there a role of spirit in music for you? That's a great question.
That's a really good question.
I love that
Nobody's
question.
asked me that before.
Yeah, that's a great question.
There's shapes, there's things I'm trying to achieve. There's a lot of the happy accidents that end up staying in the pieces because I have faith in those. And maybe that's the spirit. Maybe that's the thing I would have not normally made if I was thinking too much. So giving myself up to some other kind of guidance. I think a lot of artists have that, some kind of insight to receiving wherever that's coming from. The creator, the universe, is giving them a melody, a vision of something to draw, placing them in a place where they can make the art, for instance, allowing them to have an encounter with a collaborator that they would have never met. I have huge faith in that, that some of these are not just coming from us. It's one of the reasons, in case this is one of the next questions, is what are you working on next? I never say it because once it escapes my mouth, somebody else will grab it. And then I'll be like, dang, they took it from me. So I'm very careful with that because I believe in that. But that can be a beautiful thing as well. I think we're all, everyone must be thinking about the same things at different times, and we're all just kind of grabbing it, amongst ourselves.
Yeah, they're like little radios, kind of. There's something that's being broadcast that's invisible and that you can't see, and we're tuning into it. I totally believe that, like, writing a sermon and writing anything that has heart and meaning in it, it's depending on that spirit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, John Calvin, the old Puritan theologian, he believed that the way people listened to him kind of told him about just how much they were able to receive the spirit. Yeah. So even your audience is telling you something.
Yeah. I mean, one of the components of noise music is feedback. If this microphone got too close to the speaker, we'd hear this.
Yeah.
This noise, and but that's part of it too. I think that relationship with the audience and the artist or the musician is one way to look at these kinds of transmitting and receiving. And I think, even at greater levels, thinking about, again, the universe, the creator, I think this feedback loop exists, or we exist in that system, where it's receiving it and then sharing it back out in some way.
Yeah. You know, I can't believe it because I only asked you like a quarter of the questions I prepared, and then I only asked you like a quarter of the questions the audience prepared, but our time is out. So we'll have to ask you the other questions next time you come into town. But we're so grateful for you and for the way that you are listening to the Spirit and bringing such goodness into the world, and for your ministry as an artist. We're very grateful for it. Thank you very much for being with us. So this is the final forum of the fall season. Please mark your calendars for our annual King and Faith Forum on January 14th in partnership with the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation. You're welcome to join us for the Choral Eucharist. Today we're having the Requiem. It's the most special day musically of the year, so please join us upstairs if you can at 11. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. So think to 76278. And Raven Chacon, thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you.